Hello, folks, and welcome to Totally Tanked, the tankiest podcast in Tankville. I'm Rob.
And hello, I'm John, and you're watching the Tanktainment equivalent of Wayne's World, and this is episode 80, recording and streaming live on 21 March 2026. There's a lot happening in the world. We will discuss the Epstein War in the second half of the show, but we'll keep it to century old tanks for those who get upset with politics in the show, at least for the first half. Rob.
Today, we're diving deep on multi-turreted tanks, the landships, why they were wrong direction for armour, and what they can tell us about the way forward.
Now, before we go any further, I just want to quickly address, on the live stream, we got a lot of comments happening before the show started. Raghaus joined us from Melbourne. Thomas has joined us from Champaign, Illinois. Annihilate has joined us from Seattle-ish. Tasman's here from Sydney, Australia, I'm hoping. And Red Rum X has joined us. Apparently we upset him with our treatment of the Leffe, the beer. And everyone's having a nice little chat, which is great. If you do want to join us for the live streams, probably best go to totallytank.net and sign up to the RSS feed or the email list, and we'll let you know when these things are happening. But, you know, we do appreciate everyone who watches the show in its long tail after we've gone live. Now, you can get Totally Tank merchandise, T-shirts, hats, mugs, miniskirts, etc. from redbubble.com. Just make sure to look for Totally Tanked. Redbubble is a bit of a sea of iniquity, and just make sure it's us. Jonas Bond's joined us. Hello, mate. Okay. And if you like the show, please hit the like button, leave relevant reviews, and on YouTube we hear leaving a comment is the gold standard just now, so drop anything down there and help us out. Now, on to the tanks. Rob.
Now, first, we need to define what we're talking about when we say a multi-turreted tank. We're not talking about a little tower often at the corner of a building. We're talking about turrets, not sponsons, not hull-mounted guns, not cupolas with their own gun, not turrets with guns front and rear, not single turrets with double-decker guns. A turret is a rotating armoured housing mounted on top of the hull of the tank with a gun, which can include a machine gun, and the turret doesn't have to have a full 360-degree rotation, and it doesn't have to mount the main gun.
I think we have, without quite specifying, landed at a point where it has to have a person in the turret as well. Remote control systems haven't really qualified for this, and certainly with the mouse had little flamethrowers on the corners, and we didn't count that.
So, what do we need? More turrets. And a warning for this one, unless you know these vehicles, it might be a bit hard to visualise, so make sure to check out the slideshow running in the background on YouTube if you are just listening to the podcast.
Or totallytank.net. We do put all the slides up on the website after the show goes up. It takes forever to upload photos into Squarespace. But anyway, yep.
All right, let's start off with the tanks with only 2 turrets. And what have we got? The Vickers 6-ton, which weighed 7 tons, a British export tank, not used by the British Army. Only 150 were built by Britain from 1928. The Type A version carried a machine gun in each of the 2 single-person turrets. They could traverse 240 degrees with an overlap of fire to the front. The Type B would mount a single turret with a 47mm gun. Much more effective. Even though Britain did not put them into service themselves, they were sold as export tanks to 16 different countries.
Which is amazing considering how few they built. There's 16 countries.
Everybody was buying 3 to 7.
We have done an episode on the Vickers. It was one of our first online streams, it's a very significant tank because it was basically, we called it the training wheels of the tank world. Hoon Trend has joined us as well, so from Portland, Oregon. We do seem to have a lot of friends in Oregon.
In the Pacific Northwest there.
I've got to say, Oregon is very like the Australian Capital Territory. There's a lot of overlap in things going on there, but yeah.
I think we get more sunny days. No.
We get more sunny days.
All right.
Less skiing, though.
Yes. 16 different countries who built them under licence, applying their own modifications and improvements, usually removing the twin turrets. See our episode 38. It also had a crew of 3. The T-26, the twin turret 8-ton Soviet light tank, it was one of these Vickers 6 tons built under licence with a few improvements. Of the twin turrets, they built over 1,000 of them, built from 1931 to 1933. Carrying a machine gun in each of the single-person turrets, or possibly a 37mm anti-tank gun. They were the most numerous of the multi-turreted tanks ever built, and the most numerous of the Soviet tanks at the start of the war. They had a crew of 3. The 7TP, a 10-ton Polish light tank, 24 were built from 1933 to 1939. They carried a single machine gun in each of the turrets. Crew of 3. It was one of the first tanks built with a diesel engine. just missing out to the Japanese Type 89, which was prompted by the Vickers tank being demonstrated in Japan, catching fire after an engine backfire.
Yeah, remember, this was part of the process whereby the Japanese, who we normally paint as having no care for the life of their crews, said, we are not putting humans in a petrol-powered tank. And, for all that we like to pretend that the Japanese didn't care for the life of their crews, they were the first to make that decision.
The 7TP had a 6-cylinder liquid-cooled diesel engine, providing better torque and improved range compared to its petrol-powered tanks equivalent. So it was based off the Vickers 6-ton and improved by of which the Poles had bought the most, I think, with about 30, and then they built these ones from themselves.
Now, I just want to acknowledge we have a commenter who we can't name, Rob, and we'll just move on from that, from our point of view.
Yes.
Good to have you here.
Yeah. Crew of 3. Then there was the M2A2, an 11-ton American light tank, 237, built from 1935 to 1937.
Which is almost impossible to tell from the Vickers 6-ton with the 2 turrets. They are very similar looking vehicles.
Yeah, they've got different guns in them.
Sure, but they look very similar.
Anyway, they carried either a 50 cal or a 37mm anti-tank gun in one turret and a 30 cal in the turret beside it. The first US designed and built tank. So again, the first US designed and built tank. Everything else had been
the FTs and things like that, but
the internationals.
And the running gear of that M2, even though it was a useless tank in itself, would go on to really dominate American tank design. They got the running gear right first, which is a sensible thing to do, and then they finally got the turret right in the M4 Sherman. But yeah.
All right, Crew of 3. It was fast, lightly armoured, and never saw combat, only ever being used for training.
Hang on a sec. Tasman in the comments is saying, what about the Chartreuse? Tasman, my friend, we have so many multi-turret tanks. Don't judge us at 7 minutes into the show. They're coming.
We'll get there. There is a process to all this. They're only used for training. The main reason for the twin turrets was the drive shaft from the tall radial engine sloped down and through the fighting compartment of the tank, so the crew would have to straddle it if they were to stand there, or they could have 2 separate turrets, each with 1 person in them, so on either side of the drive shaft. So yeah, it was not the best design for it, but that was one of the reasons why you build these things, as a case of, where do we put this drive shaft in these little tanks?
There was also this moment early in tank design where they thought that the drive sprocket had to be at the front. And what eventually they'd realised from neutral steering and just reversing was that tank tracks don't care where the drive sprocket is. So you can put it up the front if that works for you. You can put it in the back if that works for you. It just doesn't actually matter. And once they realised that, it was like, we don't need to put a drive shaft through the middle of the fighting compartment.
As long as you've got your track tension right. Otherwise, if it's a little bit slack at the front and you're powering from the rear, then it can slide off the front.
True, but if you don't have your track tension right, then you've got a bunch of other problems anyway.
All right.
Now, hang on. Hans Vormhat's joined us with Guinness, which is excellent. We like that.
I saw the other day in the rugby that they've got a Guinness 0.0 these days. That's got to be...
That sounds awful. I want no part of this madness.
What kind of world is this? All right. The M2A2 was nicknamed the Mae West as the twin turrets rose up like a pair of beautiful boobs. That's what the Americans called it.
You really need to spend a lot of time in the company of men before you start seeing that there, but okay.
Then we've got the Gross Traktor, a 17-ton German, not a Nazi, medium tank. 6 were built in 1929, mounting a 75mm short-barreled main gun forward and a machine gun in the rear turret.
Now, this was this beautiful era of tank design where you could build a functional tractor and it be the basis of a tank, and you could build a tank and it be the basis of a tractor. Because, Lord knows an enormous number of Australia's 750-odd M3 mediums became tractors with the most of the fighting compartment ground off. But yeah.
All right, so these 6 were built in secret, violating the Treaty of Versailles. They had a crew of 6. It was designed to be amphibious, but after testing and failures, including a death, the amphibious requirement was removed. By 1935, its design was obsolete, and it was relegated to training and propaganda. It was a heavy influence on the Nebu Bar. How do you want to say that?
Fahrzeug, Fahrzeug. I mean, that's the most German word ever. But
which just means new vehicle design, I think it is what it is, something like that. And it's 3 turrets. Crusader 2, a 19-ton British cruiser tank. Of all the Crusaders, 5,300 were built from 1941 to 1945. But most crews removed the second turret. So they had basically it was a normal-looking tank for the Brits, and then they whacked they had the driver on the right, and they had a little machine gun turret beside the driver on the left. When you're looking from the back of the tank.
Yeah, and everybody hated so much being put in this little tiny machine gun turret that they just literally pulled it out of the tank and played it over it. It was a terrible design. But this is part of this early war thinking where they still thought that the decisive arm of a tank was its machine guns and not its high explosives.
41, buddy. Well, this is 41. Yeah. This is not the beginning of the war. This is not even interwar. This is not. But it was 1930s or 20s design.
But it was a Viscount Nuffield tank, wasn't it?
It was. It certainly was.
So there were bad ideas going in there for some reason from the biggest funder of fascism in the United Kingdom. Who can guess why that would have been? Annihilates made an interesting comment saying the rear sprocket is better on fast things, less likely to throw a track, pulls tension on the road wheels instead of throwing them slack. I'm not disagreeing with you. It's more just the Merkava's a good example where if you have the power pack at the front, then power the tracks from the front. It doesn't make that much difference. But
All right. So with the Crusader 2, the crews removed the second turret with the Beza machine gun, or left it unoccupied. And later in the war, it was built without that turret, second turret.
They took the hint.
Yeah. Like all other British tanks, it started out armed with the 2-pounder main gun. Crew of 5. When it worked, it was fast, but really only good against Italians.
Which is to say countries that didn't have much armour.
One of the few multi-turreted tanks to use Christie suspension. We'll get onto that later.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Fair enough.
The Ram, the Canadian love child of the M3 Lee and the Valentine.
Which are not 2 tanks you ever want to combine into anything.
Which is why it's a love child. Whilst Canada was building the Valentine, an infantry tank, they were looking at building their own cruiser tank. Meanwhile, across the river in Detroit, the US was busily building the interim medium tank
Isn't it across the Great Lake?
No, it's a bridge between Detroit and... Don't remember that's the one that Trump doesn't want to open these days because...
okay. I thought it was one of the Great Lakes, but okay.
Well, they're on the Great Lakes, but there is just a river between the two of them.
Okay, the connection between the Great Lakes. Okay,
So in Detroit, the US was busily building the interim medium tank, the M3. But Canada decided they didn't want to go with an interim solution, but they also needed compatibility with both the US and the Brits. So they took the turret from the Valentine and mounted it atop the hull of the M3. And then they had the Quebecois in Montreal build it. Now,
this is just a bad idea all round because the Valentine was a very serviceable tank, but what made it great was its Detroit diesel engine. And it was not a great turret. And to put that on the relatively spacious M3 is going to give you a bastard of a tank. But All
right, so they moved the driver to the right-hand side of the hull for the British sensibilities and installed a machine gun turret on the front left side of the hull. The Ram Mark I Valentine turret started off mounting the 2-pounder gun due to the lack of 6-pounders at that stage, which came along in the Ram Mark II. The machine gun turret was soon removed. 2,000 of the 29-ton Rams were built from 1941 to 1943.
Which is a lot for Canadian industry. But
they built 4,000 Valentines. Remember that.
I mean, remember Australia didn't build that many tanks.
No. All right, but none of the gun tanks saw combat and were only ever used for training. However, many of the Ram variants did deploy on operations, but I doubt any of them had their extra turret. Crew of 5.
Now, Red Rum X has made the point that the Ambassador Bridge goes over the Detroit River that separates Windsor in Canada from Michigan. So, my apologies. My knowledge of Detroit is largely from being forced to land there, trying to fly to Washington, D.C. When snowstorms were happening. Anyway, it was horrible. All right, now, Rob, we've got a 55-ton Soviet tank that no one's ever heard of. Tell us about this.
The SMK, named after old mate Kirov, who was the guy assassinated, who was mates with with Stalin. He was mates with Stalin. He was assassinated, which then let Stalin start his purges of the military. The SMK, a 55-ton Soviet heavy tank. One prototype was built in 1939. It was designed as a competitor or replacement of the T-35. It was armed with a 76mm.
The T-35's coming, folks. Don't worry.
It was armed with a 76mm gun in the main turret and a 45mm gun in the forward turret. So basically, it's just the guns that the other Soviet tanks are mounting at this stage.
But this was the same thinking that went into the M3, which is that you want or even the Shah 2B, where you want a short-barreled, wide-caliber, heavy explosive lobber, and you want a small-caliber, high-velocity anti-tank weapon. And it wasn't until armor-piercing, discarding sabot came along that the wide-caliber, high-velocity discarding sabot came into being. That's still the dominant paradigm. But before that, your anti-tank guns tended to be actually quite small-caliber weapons firing really high-velocity rounds. Yeah.
All right, so the 45mm gun was in the forward turret and it had a crew of 7. It was originally going to have 3 turrets, but the rear one was removed and a ball machine gun was placed in the rear of the main turret. So
I almost feel like that counts as an extra turret when you've got the machine gun in the back of the...
I've set the parameters, I've set the definition. The M3 Lee does not count, even though it's got sponsons, it's got hull machine guns, it's got a 37mm in the turret and a cupola.
It did have a turret on the turret with a gun in it.
Anyway, a cupola with a 50 cal. No, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. No, even if it's got 7 different guns, it doesn't count. Anyway,
all right.
The factory building the SMK also came up with a similar tank design with only 1 turret. Which would then go on to become the KV-1. Even though it was only a prototype and did not go into production, it did face combat in the Winter War against Finland in 1939. It survived its first day of combat, taking heavy fire and not being penetrated. On the second day, the main turret was disabled and then it ran over a mine and was tracked. The crew was saved by the T-100, now, which we'll get to in just a second. T-100 now filled with 15 men and was able to retreat. The SMK could not be recovered until February of 1940, so this battle had taken place in December of 1939, when a Soviet force advanced far enough to secure the wreck. The Finns supposedly tried to recover it, but did not have anything big enough that could move something that heavy.
Which is fair enough.
In the end, it required 6 T-28s, again, we'll get to them soon, to drag the SMK back to the rear. It was railed back to Kubinka, where it remained in storage until the 1950s when it was scrapped. All right, T-100.
Here we go.
Not a futuristic robot, Terminator, but a 58-ton Soviet heavy tank, two prototypes built in 1939. Along with the SMK, it was considered as a replacement to the T-35 and was tested beside the SMK during the Winter War against Finland. The SMK was slightly faster and better than the T-100, but the transmission kept failing. Both were found to be too long and too heavy to be useful in combat and were passed over for the KV-1, which was also getting tested in Finland.
Now, the KV-1, let's remember, is a very conventional tank plan, just with a bigger engine and a bigger, well, not a bigger gun, but a very big gun and a...
It was more that it had lots of armour.
And lots of armour, yeah, but it was very simple in its
it had the same gun as these guys, the 76mm gun.
Yeah. 76mm gun in a tank in 1939 was a huge gun, though.
It's also called T-34. No,
but I'm just saying that simplifying things to the point. Now, God Sent Engineer is joined the chat and he wants to know where the Baneblade is.
We mentioned 40K later on. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
They definitely get a mention because
40K is not a source of good designs for anything. The point of 40K is that they're bad designs for everything.
The point being is that these multi-turreted tanks would have influenced 40K. All right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So the KV-1 got tested in Finland, and the KV-2 was developed in response to needing to be able to take out the Finnish defensive position. So the KV-2 with the great big 152 millimeter gun, the great big fridge with a huge barrel on it, was developed in order to take out those Finnish bunkers. The T-100 also mounted a 76mm gun, in the main turret and a 45mm gun in the turret forward of that. Had a crew of 8. The T100 was built in a different factory than the SMK, hence the competition between the two of them. And also started with 3 turrets, with the rear one being removed. After saving the SMK crew in Finland with medals all round.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah. The T100 was railed back to the Kirov factory. No, not the Kirov factory. They went to a different factory, sorry. And the 2 turrets removed from the tank, and a 130mm gun in a single turret was mounted on the hull, becoming...
That's a very big gun.
becoming the Su-100Y self-propelled gun and used in the defence of Moscow in 1941. It's part of the Kubinka Museum at the moment, but only with the 130mm turret.
Now, it's worth noting for Kubinka because it's kind of the holy grail of tank museum visitors, because it's on a military base. You do need to contact them in advance. You can't just rock up. But the best stuff in Kubinka has been moved to Moscow's Patriot Park. So
including the Abrams and the chieftains. And
well, there's that as well. But it is. I mean, traveling to Russia is never simple or easy, and I have done it. But it's slightly annoying that they used to have all the good stuff at Kubinka, which was difficult to visit, but you could manage if you wanted to. And now they've split up the stuff, and it's quite a distance apart. But still doable. You know, if you're traveling to Russia for whatever reason, then Patriot Park and Kubinka might well be worth a visit. But it's not. I don't think they've done themselves a service in terms of being a tank tourism destination. Anyway,
there you go. All right, now we get on to the Char 2C.
Here you go, Tasman. Here we go.
The 69-ton beast of a French super heavy land ship. 10 were built in 1921, 6 went into service and were the pride of the French army, but they did not fare well during the Battle of France in 1940. The largest ever operational tank by volume and dimension to see combat. It was armed with a 75mm main gun in the front turret and an 8mm Hotchkiss machine gun in the rear turret, plus another 7 Hotchkiss machine guns scattered around the hull. Crew of 12, yeah. So, yes, it's not the heaviest. There are heavier modern tanks, but it is still the biggest by volume, so it took up the most space of any tank ever.
Look, and
built and it actually saw combat.
This is kind of let's explore for a moment what goes wrong with the multi-turret tanks, because they get envisaged as being these land dreadnoughts, right? And that they can dominate the battlefield, but fundamentally the command and control of them and you know, ranging and fall of shot and all these things, it's very complicated. You know, warships that have multiple turrets have thousands of crew, and they're trying to get dudes who are rocking up and down on land in a way that when they're moving, that ships never have to worry about. To try and keep 3, 4, 5 different turrets all pointing at something useful, and then all these guns firing, and a commander still trying to keep track of what they're doing and why they're doing it.
It's just one commander.
Yeah.
All right, question nuts. From the Gauntlet 860. How do we keep the beer tube going? It's we've actually managed to fit 7 beers in this one today.
Yeah, so we fill it up at the start of the show, and then at the when it's empty, I put it down over here, and then we just go to
the Commander's Reserve.
We just go to drinking beers like normal people.
Yeah.
But in the middle here, we have a glycol tube that is keeping the beer cold. And anyone who follows us on social media will have seen the posts where when we start icing the tube an hour before the show starts, is a thing.
Purchased for us by our friend of the show,
Clayton Lockerbie from Workbench Hobbies, who has a much more successful YouTube channel than us. Much more. But hopefully... Oh, Rob, we forgot to mention we're going to Tank Fest, Oz Armour Fest.
Well, that's in the script.
I know it is, but it's at the end, and we've got 16 people on the line now, so let's just mention... Oz Armour Fest. We're going this year, August in Cairns.
End of August, yep.
Yep. We would love to see as many of you as possible there.
There will be beers over the bar. Mm-hmm. We'll be putting money on the bar.
There's some talk there might be a panel, and we might be on it.
There you go.
But yes. Maybe we won't be. We can't speak until more things get resolved.
But anyway, the point being is that, yes, we'll be up in Cairns for this year's Oz Armour Fest at the end of August. As long as the world's still here, I guess.
And planes are still flying.
Yeah.
Hey, Woz has commented. Yeah, we'll see you there. And trust me, you haven't lived till you've gone drinking with Woz.
Yes, there will be beer appreciation, I'm sure. Anyway, we'll see how we go. Anyway, but Those are all the tanks with 2 turrets, John. But
Let's go more. Let's go more.
But is that enough turrets? No, we need more turrets. So what's
like Leonard Cohen in his late career had a great you want it darker. Let's go darker. You want more. We got more.
So what tanks have 3 turrets? So this is where we get into the Cruiser Mark 1 A9, a 13-ton British light tank, 125 were built from 1938 to 1941, armed with a 2-pounder gun in the main turret and a single Vickers 303 in each of the forward 2 turrets, designed as the first British cruiser tank. The crew of six, powered by a London bus engine, cheap and easily maintained, but not terribly fast for a cruiser tank, and only 14mm of armour, which, because of the limited space between all of the moving turrets, they couldn't bolt on any extra armour, leaving it very under-armoured for the start of the war, where it would see action in France and North Africa.
The Germans couldn't have believed their luck when one of these trundled into view.
Seriously, the turrets, the front turrets were built such that they could turn, and there was only a very limited space between their turning and the other bits and pieces of the hull. So that, as I said, they couldn't actually add any more armour on because there was just no space to be able to turn the turrets and have more extra armour. So you had the front machine guns were on the left and right of the hull, and in the middle was another little pop-up armoured section for where the driver sat and looked out from. So 6 guys in this tank, which is really quite small. All right, saw action in France and North Africa. In the desert, they usually left the turrets uncrewed.
This is the one where they had 2 turrets and the driver all in the glacis of the tank. It was nuts. Yeah.
In the desert, they usually left the turrets uncrewed as it was too hot, and they just roasted. Plus, it was pretty ineffective. The differing size road wheels and the unique suspension also saw the tank lose its tracks very easily. So
that's what you want. Yeah.
All right.
And I've got to just comment here. I'll reiterate again that when you go look up pictures of this, if you haven't seen them, or check them out on totallytank.net, there were 3 men in the glacis of this quite small 13-ton tank. 2 of them in little turrets and one of them trying to drive the thing. And, it looks like it's been made out of sheet steel and rivets with machine guns pointing everywhere. And against an enemy with no anti-tank weapons, I suppose it would have been quite fearsome. But against anyone with even a basic anti-tank rifle...
Yep.
We are staunch defenders of the anti-tank rifle on this show.
The boys' anti-tank rifle.
Like the boys' anti-tank rifle, because the armour that was available at the start of the war was living in fear of a 20mm anti-tank rifle.
All right, and hello to Monty Mace 2715.
Hey Monty, good to see you here. And apparently Monty volunteers at Puckapunyal
there you go.
Museum,
I was talking to one of the guys from the Bandiana Tank Museum the other day, and they said yes, they're handing over the museum after its refurbishments soon, but then they've got to do some final things, so it actually won't be open until June.
You're talking about the Puckapunyal Museum?
No, the Puckapunyal's now open.
Okay, all right.
Tuesdays to Thursdays from last weekend. It's the Bandiana one won't be open until June,
which is Australian Army's logistics base. But
yes, which is where you build and refurbish tanks.
Well, of course.
All the tanks. Whenever you want to refurbish a tank entirely and teach the people here how to work on tanks.
So when they fail to refurbish a tank, they put it in their museum?
Well, no. But the thing is, they've been refurbishing them for the last 60 years at Bandiana. They also does where you teach the apprentices / mechanics who learn how to actually fix the tanks. So they have tanks. If you ever want to steal a tank, there's one parked in Bandiana that'll be. It's only the architecturally designed building is...
I can't wait till we get that takedown request from Defence. But okay. What's the next multi-turret tank we have to talk about, Rob?
All right. The Medium Mark III, a 16-ton British museum tank. Museum tank. Museums on the mind. Medium tank. 3 produced in 1930. Armed with a 3-pounder gun in the main turret and a single Vickers 303 in each of the forward 2 turrets. Crew of 6, inspired by the 5-turreted A1E1 independent heavy tank. The project was costly and long and made redundant by the change in British doctrine to having light/recon tanks, infantry tanks and cruiser tanks. There was no need for a medium tank.
Which was a bad doctrine, but Yeah, it was better than having these things, so that was good.
The 3 completed medium Mark IIIs entered service as headquarters tanks in the Royal Tank Corps, one of which was commanded by Brigadier Percy Hobart, who later
King of the Funnies.
Who then became on to Hobart's Funnies. All 3 tanks were lost, destroyed by fire or scraps by 1940. A British officer was court-martialed for selling plans of the Mark III medium to the Soviets, which supposedly used them to help design the T-28 medium tank with its multiple turrets. So how do you feel about that, Sis? We've sold them the biggest lemon in the world. Sorry, I've handed over plans to the biggest lemon in the world so they can build even more lemons. And your court-martial, I should be getting a knighthood.
Look, I've seen Americans get very angry that Australia sold the HMAS Melbourne, our aircraft carrier, to the Chinese on the basis that, we taught the Chinese how to build aircraft carriers. And look, my dad spent many years on Melbourne, and friends of his spent even longer on that thing. And the general view of everyone who served on her was that you would set back a country's naval aviation by at least 20 years by letting him have that dog of a ship.
So
not because Melbourne...
You should be thanking us.
You should be thanking us. We set back Chinese naval aviation by selling them to Melbourne because it was a late World War II light fleet carrier that we had then kludged an angled deck and auxiliary boilers to run the catapults into in a way that you would never clean sheet a ship. So anyway, a similar thing is all I'm saying. But, yeah.
Does America even say thank you? No.
No. Do they? No.
Ukraine sends anti-drone technology to the Middle East. Does America even say thank you? No.
Yeah, they're not very good at saying thank you, apparently.
Type 91, an 18-ton Japanese heavy tank. Pretty light for a heavy tank.
Pretty heavy for a Japanese tank.
One prototype built in 1931. It only had 20 mils of armour, carrying a 57mm gun in the main turret and a 6.5mm machine gun in the front and rear single turrets, crew of 5.
I just want to note that the Japanese Type 91 and the Type 95, which we're both going to talk about, there's a lot of photos online claiming, and the photos are the same, claiming to be both of them, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing there, but I've done my best with...
They were mixed up quite a lot because they were both running around at the same time, and there was a little bit confused. And because they were working on building these tanks, they were changing around the configurations of them because they were trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. And so they would pull stuff off, whack stuff on, and away you go. Now, here's our German thing. I'll let you say the name again.
The Neubaufahrzeug,
which means new construction vehicle. There you go. A 23-ton Nazi medium tank, 5 prototypes built in 1934. Even though the main turret has both a 75mm short-barreled infantry support gun and a 37mm anti-tank gun.
So that's the main turret has 2 different guns coaxially mounted, which is awesome, and I really wish more countries had done that.
Double-decker.
It
also has 2 front and rear-facing machine gun turrets. The idea actually separated. The idea eventually separated and became the Panzer III and the Panzer IV, which is why you have your 75mm gun in your Panzer IVs and your 37s and your Panzer IIIs. A crew of 6. 3 of them were shipped north in 1940 for the invasion of Norway, with one being lost and the others returning to Germany, where they probably took part in Operation Barbarossa. If not, they were all cut up, and if not destroyed, they were all cut up for scrap.
Well, possibly, there's still tanks being discovered that have been, at some point in the war, they were used to create a culvert. And people are coming along and going, there's actually a tank under this road, and that's worth a couple of $1 million to a collector now.
Those detectorists with their little metal detectors going around saying, I found something here, it looks pretty big. And we all laugh at them, and we're still going to, but I'm glad they're going to have some success.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of the German armour in war museums or tank museums today is stuff that's was literally buried at some point in World War II. And they're dragging out of bogs.
Was the one of the Target 2s in France that in a culvert, the French saying, look, there's still live ammunition in this thing. We can't dig it out. We're just going to leave it there. All right, we're not going to stuff around with this because if we do, it could well blow up, and that's taking out one of our major highways. We talked about that in the Target 2 episode.
But now they're worth millions of dollars. So okay, let's get it out. Let's sell it to a rich arsehole. Not all tank owners are arseholes. I hasten to add because I really want them to let me ride in their tanks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Type 95, Rogo Heavy, a 26-ton Japanese heavy tank. So it's getting slightly heavier, almost up to a buddy...
26 ton is very heavy for a Japanese tank and a medium tank in anyone else's language.
I was about to say almost getting up to a Sherman. Look, 4 prototypes built in 1934. These were the next step along from the design of the Type 91. It mounted a 70mm gun in the main turret and a 37mm anti-tank gun in the forward turret and a 6.5mm machine gun in the rear turret. Armour increased up to 35mm. It was possible they were used in China, and there are photos of them at the end of the war with some USGIs around one. Other possibilities are that the superstructure was removed from the top of the tank and a 105mm self-propelled gun and housing were mounted instead, much like the T-100. All right, the T-28, a 28-ton Soviet medium tank. 503 were built from 1933 to 1941. It carried a 47mm howitzer in the main turret and had 2 forward turrets with single machine guns, as well as a coax and rear machine gun in the main turret. Crew of 6. So again, 503 of these things made. Besides the little light tanks.
I'm going to interrupt you. Tasman wants to know, why haven't we included the Tsar tank?
It doesn't have a hull. I want to say that. There you go. That's my excuse.
All right, there we go.
I could be totally wrong, but off my memory of the design of the Tsar tank, I don't think it actually has a hull.
All I remember is the wheels. Yeah. And then the little wheel at the back.
Yeah, well, which we'll see, which we've got a design of, the Australian design in the slideshow.
Now, someone should build a replica Tsar tank. That would get some crowds at tank festivals.
There you go. All right,
yeah.
and you go.
I just want to note that we do have a poll running. It's got 15 votes going, which is a lot for us.
But it's deadlocked.
Yeah, multi-turret tanks, 2 options. No one's ever put enough on versus we're always a small boy's dream. And it's 53% on no one's ever put enough on versus we're always a small boy's dream.
So this is your opportunity to...
Yeah. Monty's saying that there's a Crusader 2 at Puckapunyal. Okay, that's
there you go.
Interesting to know.
We'll have to get that road trip going at some stage, possibly after the Bandiana opens up again. Anyway, look, so that's 3 turrets, John. Surely that's enough turrets.
No, we want more.
No, let's look at the tanks with 4 turrets.
Hey!
All right. Well, realistically, 4 being an odd number for turrets, the OI, Japan...
I mean, more than 1 is an odd number for turrets, really, but... Sure.
All right, I'm just throwing... And realistically, I'm throwing the OI in here because it's one of the few... It's the only tank that I could find that actually had 4 turrets. So the OI, Japan finally figures out what a heavy tank should be. It was a 120-ton super heavy tank, 1 incomplete prototype, started in 1941, designed after... It was designed after the defeat of Khalkhin where the current army tanks of the Type 97 Chiha and the Type 95 Hargo were found to be deficient. It was designed to be a mobile pillbox in the wide open plains of Manchuria. It was to be armed with a 105mm gun in the main turret, with 2 forward turrets, each carrying a 70mm gun.
Which is a big armament for that era.
Yep.
But yeah.
And a rear turret with a double-decker machine guns. Not much is actually known about the OI. The main descriptions come from an engineer who worked on it, Shigeo Otaka, but there was very limited documentation available publicly after the war, all in Japanese. But more might be held by private companies in Japan. It was to have a crew of 11. So basically, it's one of the things where... Yes, a lot of the Western countries running around Europe and so forth probably had a lot of speakers that could figure out their own things, but Japanese writing is difficult even for Japanese people. What was it? I think your brother said, look, most kids in Japan don't learn to read all the different versions of Japanese writing until they were about 15 or 16. So it's not a case of, you can learn in one go.
Yeah, I'll never forget driving around Japan with my brother and his girlfriend at the time and realizing that they were reading what's called Romanji, which is the English characters on the road signs, because they were out of their own neighborhoods, so all the place name kanjis, they couldn't read either.
Because, you've got the Romanji kanji and there's the other one, which, again, it all makes it... hard to read.
So that's 4 turrets.
Yeah. So anyway, the OI yes, it was designed. Yes, the prototype was starting to be built, but we don't have as much information as people would like to think, especially when it gets such a prominent role in various games, computer games. Anyway, 4 turrets. That's got to be enough. Got to be all the turrets you can fit on a tank. What do you mean there are tanks with 5 turrets? Are they even real? They are. What are they? What are they, you ask? Well, first off, we have the A1E1 Independent, a 34-ton experimental British heavy tank, only one prototype built in 1926.
And it's the pride of Bovington's collection, but yes.
Once they decided side sponsons were not the way to go, instead, let's have 5 turrets. The middle main turret housed a 47mm 3-pounder gun, and it was surrounded by 4 satellite turrets, each with a Vickers 303 machine gun.
Now, I've heard places like Wargaming describe it as the Vickers machine guns were designed to look like bigger guns than they actually were, but it's not. It's just they had a water-cooled housing, which is the same reason that the Australian Sentinel ended up, once they armoured the water-cooled housing, something that looked like a dick. But, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say the A1E Independent is mostly a set of machine gun nests with a moderately big cannon for the time, but not huge. But this is the idea of, oh, we've got an invincible thing because it's got thin sheet armor all around it, and we can dominate the battlefield. And someone just said, oh, well, how about we just have a 20mm anti-tank rifle? Boom, you're dead.
Right. Jonas has reminded me, katakana is the other Japanese written language.
Yeah, the ganas, hiragana, katakana. They've got. They do have phonetic alphabets, but my point was just that Japanese people in Japan, because they put the Romanji characters on the highway signs, mostly rely on those to get around.
Anyway, so the A1E1 had a crew of 8. The British generals loved the idea, and so did other countries wanting a heavy tank. That had firepower, defence against infantry, enough armour to break through enemy trenches. The left rear turret could even angle upwards to shoot at aircraft. So.
Oh, yeah, good. How is the little dude in that little turret meant to suddenly track an incoming plane?
Right. Now we get on to the T-35.
Hey, the greatest of the multi-turret tanks.
A 45-ton Soviet heavy tank. 60 were built from 1934 to 1939. The only 5-turreted tank to go into production and see combat, armed with a 76mm short-barreled gun in the main turret, along with 2 diagonally opposite turrets with a 45mm anti-tank gun in each, facing front and rear, which sat beside another front and rear facing machine gun turret. It had a crew of 10.
Now, let's remember the main legacy of the T-35 is that to move this enormous beast, the Soviets had to come up with a 600 horsepower diesel engine, which was the Kharkiv V2, which would then go on to power every Soviet tank until the 1990s. The early model T-90s relied on this variant of this engine. So the legacy of the T-35 in terms of how do we move this enormous beast, we must have this colossal engine. They got Konstantin Chelpan to design it, then they murdered him. It was the design legacy of the T-35 is huge, just because of the engine. The rest of it was a stupid idea. but it gave them an engine that would endure longer than any tank engine has any right to have endured.
All right, Monty's saying the beer tower is looking very sad, but
there's still some left in it, buddy.
We are looking very happy.
Yeah,
the main thing is we're outcomes based.
Yeah,
right? We are looking very happy.
We're doing great.
Right. Look, I'm positive that's enough turrets. No one would ever want to build a tank with more than 5 turrets, would they? Those were the real tanks that had lots of turrets. But what about the ones that were designed and went so far along the process that they started to be built, or even a prototype or mock-up were built? This is where we get into the Frenchies. All right, so
here you go, Tasman.
Yep, the French FCM Char BB, a 45-ton secret battle tank with twin 50mm guns in the hull and twin machine gun turrets on top. Each were situated behind the observation cupola. Not to mention the front spar rollers on the front on the front of the tank to stop the guns ploughing into the mud. So basically, I had a little.
It was a sissy bar at the front.
Yeah.
So when you go down a ditch to make sure you don't mess up your guns,
like the Saint Chamond used to do. A mock-up was built and is supposedly still at the FCM La Seine-sur-Mer facility in France. So supposedly they've still got it, but they're not showing it to anyone.
They should send that to Samoa so everyone can just go to one place in France to see their tanks.
Yep.
Anyway.
The ARL Tractor C, a 145-ton French super heavy tank, started in 1938 with a wooden mock-up built in 1940 but not completed. 12 metres long in order to cross 7-metre wide trenches. 8 crew. The mock-up was captured by the Germans and dismantled, and the designs destroyed. Mounted a 90mm and a 47mm guns in separate turrets, with both being mounted to the front of the hull. Not to be confused with the AMX Tractor C, 140
So here we go. We're back to tractors. Everyone's pretending they're tractors.
But they're all Tractor C.
Yes, sure.
I think is my point. Is that
is that C for Shah?
Probably.
Anyway,
140-ton French super heavy fortress tank started in 1939 with a mock-up built in 1940.
But this is where, but they're like, okay, let's build a fortress tank. It'll be like a fortress. It'll be a mobile pillbox. And it's like, and what bridge can it cross? No, none. We don't. We got nothing. And how do we get it on a train? Oh, it's not going to get on a train. Where's it going to go at 5 miles an hour?
We'll get on to. They actually could fit on trains because the whole point of why they were so long and up to 12 meters long this was so that because they could fit so many guns on a really long thing which they can then throw on the back of a
but the length then meant that the tracks didn't turn particularly well. But
so this one, the AMX Tractor C, had 100 mils of armour and a 105mm gun in the front turret and a 47mm gun in the turret to the rear and machine guns. And machine guns scattered all over the hull. Right. Then we get to the FCM F1, a 139 French super heavy tank.
139 ton.
139 ton, yes. A wooden mock-up was built in 1939. It had a 47mm gun in the normal tank turret to the front of the hull and a much larger raised turret to the rear of the hull, mounting a 90mm gun that would fire over the front turret. The barrel of which...
Super firing, it's a dreadnought. No, it's a super dreadnought.
The barrel of the 90mm gun was long enough that it couldn't shoot the front turret, unless you really tried, I'm guessing. This was the winning design of the French super heavies being considered, and an order for 12 was placed in 1940 to replace the Char 2C. These were seen as landships that would dominate the trenches and destroy the Siegfried line and any of those tiny Panzer II Gnats that might get in their way.
I mean, we could just run over a Panzer II without too much trouble, but yeah.
All right. So, of course, most of these tanks are available in World of Tanks because they need to keep on making new tanks available. And then there were those that never left the drawing board, of which there were many. So here are some standouts and weird ones. All right. First off, as we've spoken before about in the Mouse episode, the Land Cruiser P1000 Ratte.
Rat. It's just a rat.
A rat. Mentioned in episode 73 with Mouse, it was to be a 1,000-ton behemoth with 7 turrets, mounting a pocket battleship turret to the front, 2 37mm gun turrets at the rear, and 4 15mm autocannon turrets in the middle of the deck. Plus around 50 machine guns of various sizes scattered everywhere along the hull, and a crew of lots.
Now, to be fair to the Germans, which I don't like to say often, they had at least with the Rat realised that it was fundamentally a land battleship and literally battleship armament, and they would need an enormous amount of anti-aircraft fire to defend it. Now, they still hadn't figured out how to do anti-aircraft fire because fundamentally no one did until the Americans in 1942 when they had gun-laying radar and proximity fuses. And boy, then did they really start to pull some planes out of the sky. But they had at least taken on board the idea that we're going to need a lot of anti-aircraft guns on the top of this stupidly enormous thing that will just crash the bottom of a river at the first time it encounters one. But yeah.
All right. Just to show that Australia can come up with some wacky ideas, we also can...
I've never heard of this before.
No.
We also it was nuts. There you go. Here's your Tsar tank, Tasman. It's an Australian one.
There was the Cossa Land Cruiser, a 3-wheeled tank design with 2 6-inch gun turrets and machine guns protected by what is listed as heavy armour plate. No need to dig into the details. She'll be right, mate.
Well, we certainly had no engine that we could make in Australia that would have moved this thing.
Anyway, a picture of it is in the slideshow, so please, if you want to see the Tsar tank...
What is the website that people can find our slideshow in?
TotallyTank.net.
There we go.
There we go. Design and development. So you ask yourself, what are the practical and impractical reasons to mount multiple turrets on a tank, and why did so many nations do it? All right. So something that jumps out at me is that there are 3 basic designs for multi-turret tanks, starting with the Vickers 6-ton, made popular by the T-26, light tank with twin turrets with the machine guns, the M2A2 and the 7TP. It seems a design choice to overcome the engineering issue of the drive shaft filling the fighting compartment.
Which was not an actual... Turned out wasn't an issue, but they thought it was an issue at the time, and it's really funny to see how that evolved.
Yeah. But it seems it could have been quickly overcome if they'd tried a little harder, which is what happened with the next builds of all these tanks when they've taken out the twin turrets, put in a single turret with a decent anti-tank gun in it. Then there were the British medium or cruiser tanks, the Medium Mark III and the Cruiser A9.
Crusader A9.
Sorry,
yeah.
Crusader A9. Normal tank shapes, but whacker 1 or 2 little turrets on the front beside the driver. Was this because ball gunner mounts were for the co-driver weren't good enough, or because they wanted a larger area of fire down the with the turrets able to turn to fire down the sides of the tank?
But this is the problem with these stupid little turrets that they eventually realised and deleted them because of it, which was just that fundamentally the field of view of the guy was to the front, maybe a little bit to the side, but
the guns could turn to fire down the side of the
I know they could, but they had to be aware of that. And if the tank commander is aware of a threat down there, he can swing the main turret and engage it with a coaxial machine gun. Yeah.
Anyway, so whether or not it was in order to be able to fire down the sides of the tank, like a turret bastion on a castle, whatever the case, the extra turrets were soon left empty or removed in the field, or before the factories started removing those extra turrets from themselves. And lastly, there are the long tanks, which is what most people think of when they're looking at multi-turreted tanks. The long ones, starting with the Char 2C and the A1, E1 independent, forming the basis for the T28, T35, SMK, T100, Type 91, Type 95, the OI, the Gross Tractor, and the Neubaufassung. A long hull with main turret and then front and or rear turrets to provide all-round fire, usually with a large caliber HE gun and a smaller caliber high-velocity anti-tank gun. The length and extra weight and size were too much for the technology of the time, creating a big target with little armour that was unable to effectively bring fire to bear, and which would break down if anything looked at it funny.
Now Alan has joined the comments just saying he's been somewhere doing something else. He's getting cigars. He wants us to slow down. Look, we've got a really good halftime interview coming up, and I don't know if you're going to like what we have to say in the second half, Alan, but we're just going to hope for the best.
When the role of one big multi-turreted tank was split into 2 vehicles, the outcome was...
This was always the better option, is to have a
much better
platoon of tanks and let each of them individually engage things. Yeah. But sometimes I talk too much about warships in this show, but there is almost no cases, even when you've got 4 or 5, or in the case of Agincourt, 7-turreted battleships, they're still only trying to engage the one target at the time. And it comes down to what is the biggest gun you can fit in to engage that one target you're trying for. And if you need to engage multiple targets, you're probably in a very bad situation. Like, I know when Donald Trump launched the Golden Fleet Trump class battleship, it was firing at 15 different things. It's like, that is a ship that's about to go down. You're in a ship's in a absolutely abominable position when it's trying to engage more than one target at a time. It's nutty, but people had to learn.
All right. Yeah. So, dividing them, your multi-turreted tanks up to into 2 different things, like the Panzer III and the Panzer IV. Look, even the Brits came up with the doctrine of the light recon tanks, cruiser tanks, and infantry tanks, negating the need for land battleships. But realistically, I mainly think it became, look, everyone else is doing it. They must know something we don't know, and if we don't do something different, if we do something different, we'll look silly, and then the French will laugh at us. Because the French laughing at you is what terrifies most people.
I mean, French battleship design of the late 1800s would suggest that the French are never worried about anyone laughing at them, and are infinitely stronger for that. But yeah.
All right. But why would nations want tanks with extra turrets? Here are some of the pros. A fast light tank used to exploit gaps in the enemy line or to encircle a foe would likely be concerned mostly with facing infantry and soft targets. For this reason, small cannons and machine guns in separate turrets could be deemed adequate. It worked. Another reason for the bigger tanks is, as we're saying, it works on battleships. So why shouldn't you have multiple turrets on landships? Engage more
and I go back to that being like, how many thousands of crew does a battleship have to manage that? And even then, they still only aim at one target at a time.
All right. So they can engage more targets at once and pour on more fire onto a single target, making sure you hit it and destroy it. You also have another reason to have it is you have redundant firepower. If one turret gets knocked out, the vehicle can still be effective. Another reason is you had a gun for any occasion. Big HE rounds for bunkers and infantry, high velocity for against armour, and plus multiple machine guns for infantry and planes. Another benefit is you could easily cross trenches with your very, very long tank. Also, another reason, they were big and scary, providing a psychological advantage, but this could be said of most tanks if they weren't used for tanks.
It does come down to that the trench crossing thing was part of World War I tank design, and in the mid-war they were still thinking, sorry, the mid-interwar period, they were still thinking about that. And yes, that is the one case where having a 20-metre long tank lets you cross over enormous trenches. The fact you can't turn the damn thing and the tracks will come off in the internal stresses is a whole other thing. But you do understand how this interwar period tank design, there were reasons why they went down this garden path that fundamentally wasn't a great idea.
Yeah. All right. These long tanks, they were also good for propaganda as they were so big and impressive, and that's what a lot of them were used for. You also had all-round protection and were able to fire in every direction at once. They were very important which was very important when breaking through trenches, as enemies could come at you from any direction, and turret traverses were very slow or limited to certain arcs of fire at the time. Also, the idea of tanks and infantry working together was not understood by everyone. It was used, but it's not understood by everyone. So a tank had to be able to work on its own, was the idea. Then again, what were some of the downsides?
Now, Rob, sorry, we've just got a comment that from Thomas that we need to address, saying we should have multiple beer tubes stored in a rack like tank shells, and when we finish one, we toss the empty, reach back and put a fresh one in because, tank podcast. And let me tell you, the difficulty of filling this one tube to get in here, we have
the commander's reserve right here, right? This is what comes in when we run out. And logistician here, I know how to make sure we've got beer.
Thank you for your helpful ideas for how to manage a beer tube, but we are experts in managing beer tubes, and we can tell you that we're doing as best as we can. But thank you for your input.
That's the large HE rounds. These are the small high velocity anti-tank rounds. There you go. And what were some of the downsides for the multi-turret tanks? There were a few cons.
A few cons.
Which
is weird considering the concept has been completely abandoned. But yeah, okay.
With lots of different types of guns, you need lots of different types of ammo, which all need to be stored inside the tank, which then takes up more space inside the tank. And how do you balance the mix? Do you need more machine gun ammo for the possible 5 machine guns you've got, or more of the larger HE rounds against how many tanks do you face? Even though the high velocity rounds could be smaller, and you can probably fit more of them in. So it's all a balance of figuring that out.
Now, hang on. We've got a lot of chat going on with people wanting more beer tubes. And unless someone is willing to come here and sit in this room and fill up the beer tube after 20 minutes and get it ready, then one beer tube is all you're getting, folks.
I thought on the way was when you fired, rather.
Yeah, fire in the hole, whatever. But we're just saying filling them up is a convoluted process that takes quite a bit of time, and you can't leave them with beer in them for too long because they get flat. So anyway, folks, let's be sensible.
We drink at the pace that we drink at because we're very experienced.
Yes.
All right. Complexity of the vehicle was also caused a lot of issues. Not just the fact that there were more moving pieces because you had more turrets. You also
There's more stuff to break. It's like, is that gun even serviceable now? You've got so many of them on here. How many of them are ready to even be operated?
You also had more crew trying to work together and more for the crew commander to direct whilst still doing their own job, all in a noisy, clanking behemoth that did not have good internal communications. With the crew physically separated from each other, you can't.
They're in each little turret.
Yeah, you can't just tap the rear turret gunner on the shoulder and tell them where to fire because you're about 5 meters away from them. The Americans experimented with the effectiveness of the multiple turrets in the M2A2 and found that the rate of fire and crew efficiency of 2 people in a single turret was greater than the 2 crew each in their own turret, even when they had to work around the drive shaft. Therefore, teamwork creates synergies, boys and girls. There you go. Just to get some management speak in there. Turrets are usually the most thickly armoured part of a tank, which also makes them heavy. So if you have 5 armoured turrets on a hull, that is a lot of weight for a tank, which then needs an engine, transmission, brakes, suspension, and gears that can handle that weight.
Now, hang on. Just in this chat going on here, Raghav's saying we need a keg. I've got a kegerator, literally just,
A metre away.
Well, not a metre.
2 metres away.
3 metres away, but it's in another room, and I have to get up. And anyway, it's not going to work. We're doing our best, guys. Trust me, we thought about all this. If we just had beer tubes and coming out of our heads, that'd be great. But we're not. We're drinking a lot more than 2 cans in the beer hats, guys. Come on.
Right. Plus, you all need all the mechanics to be able to fix these great big things, as it was more likely to break down because there's less tolerance for failure in any one part.
Also, the number of ball bearings. The number of ball bearings in a T-35 is colossal. And when the enemy are bombing your ball bearing factories, that's not an insignificant issue.
The days of bombing ball bearing factories, yes, yeah, no. The greater mass also meant that tanks were more likely to get bogged down and then could not be recovered because they were so damn heavy. They were hard to transport and would usually need to be partially disassembled to fit on a train car. Multiple turrets took up more interior space inside the tank, and the extra crew took up more spaces also, making less room for other things. So using Christie's suspension on a multi-turreted tank was not usually compatible to the Christie's, as the Christie's suspension took up internal space on its own, but that didn't stop the Brits from doing it on the Crusader. Another reason it was bad. See Totally Tanked episode 66.
66.
All right.
We're at 80 now. I can't believe that. Crusader feels like yesterday. Anyway.
They were expensive. More moving parts, more mass, and the gubbins to deal with that weight cost more. They took longer to build, required more raw materials, and more trained crew to operate the vehicle. They could not manoeuvre well. The long hull made to cross trenches meant they could not turn well, and if you turned too hard, the tracks would slip off. They were a big target, the Char 2C being the largest operational tank by volume ever, usually very tall, but also the long length made them very easy to hit, especially with artillery, which as soon as you take a track off, you can't recover it, you can't do anything with it, and away we go. All right, conflicts. As we've discussed in episode 38 about the Vickers 6-ton, it was the first to fight during the Chaco War in South America in 1933. The T-26s were used in the Spanish Civil War. Both the Chinese and the Japanese were also using the Vickers 6-tons against each other in the 30s, but I don't know if they were single or twin turret tanks. The machine gun carrying twin-turreted diesel-engined 7TPs were used by the Polish Army in defense of Warsaw in September of 1939. However, the single-turreted versions with the 37mm Bofors that they'd built were much more effective. And at the same time, whilst coming from the east, were the T-26s and T-28s of the Soviets into Poland. The Soviet T-26s, SMK, T-100 and T-28s were used in the Winter War against Finland, not the T-35. The Finns captured T-26s and T-28s, but only those that could be driven away, as they did not have anything that could move any of the T-200 T-28s that they were managed to disable.
Which is, again, just the logistics of even today, tanks at 80 tons are very difficult to deal with, and building your tanks bigger and bigger, particularly when you've got 1930s vintage engines with maybe 150 horsepower. These ideas were just insane.
But just think about this. So during the Winter War, the Soviets had 500 T-28s. They've gone into Finland. They've lost 200 of them. They've managed to recover most of them and repair them and then put them out again. But as I said, the Finns were able to, without any useful tanks of their own or anti-tank capabilities, they were able to take out these 200 of these heavily armoured things, and away they go. All right.
But it's a bit like the Ewoks in,
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi, yeah. In that... Yeah, the Japanese did this at the tail end of World War II. If you dig holes and put spikes in them and the tank falls into the hole and then you build a bonfire around it, you can kill a tank. You don't need, you don't need big anti-tank weapons to defeat tanks. Just a little bit of good engineering. Anyway, continue, please, Rob.
The Brits used their Cruiser Mark 1A9s in France and North Africa, and their Crusader Mark 2s in North Africa, Greece, and the Middle East. The French Char 2Cs were used in the Battle of France, but failed to get to the starting line where their train was disabled in June 1940. Probably the most used and most numerous multi-turreted tanks were the Soviets, who deployed their thousands of T-26s and hundreds of T-28s and their 60 T-35s in defense against Operation Barbarossa. At a time when Stalin was pushing forward anything that moved and was able to fire, they were there too. However, they did not fare well against the Nazis, with most being lost in the first 2 months of the war, with the heavier tanks mostly being lost to breakdown and destroyed by their own crews. Soviet production was then focused on vehicles that had shown themselves to be much better than such as the T-34. The Nazis also used captured T-26s and T-28s, and one T-35 was made into a fixed German fortification after they spent some time inspecting it and saying, yeah, we're not going to do this. Legacy. From the old to the light, the super heavies and multiple turreted tanks were seen as a viable design to provide all-round fire whilst engaging multiple targets. I feel the main legacy of these vehicles is not their place in history, but instead their place online, with games such as World of Tanks, making the impossible and impractical designs that were never built something they can see and command and have fun with.
Look, I just think there that the interesting thing is that the same reason why these tanks don't work in World of Tanks or War Thunder, which is that it's really hard to coordinate multiple points of view from each of the turrets and integrate the fire control, is exactly the same reason why they actually failed in real life. That's, I don't know what it means, but it's interesting that it's the same problem.
Look, from the game's point of view, including these tanks means, first, there are more tanks for users to buy, collect, and secondly, they can make them have whatever strengths and weaknesses they want. So you can have Tier 5 super heavies instead of them all being all high-level tanks, and no one can say, there's no way your FCM Char BB could bounce my shot or penetrate my armour, because they're all a bit of a mystery. And lastly, as tank dorks, we like to find new knowledge of things and we didn't know things we didn't know, and to most people, these are all unknown vehicles until they are available to play.
Now, just quickly, Monty has asked a very good question. When was the last multi-turret tank designed? And I would argue that
1941.
Well, no, I would argue current tank designs where you've got the main turret and they're putting a remote weapon station on top probably are getting pretty close to being a multi-turret design.
But it doesn't fit my definition of having the extra turret on the hull.
There's no human in the turret. Yeah.
Well, I guess my point is that it's got to be on the hull, not on the existing turret, and then it just becomes a cupolas on cupolas on cupolas. Yeah.
Gauntlet's asking if we've covered the Puma or the Striker's M1128. No, we haven't done wheeled vehicles a lot because we're pretty broad in our view of what a tank is, and broader than a lot of people are happy with. But we do want tracks.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. We'll definitely cover this.
We probably will.
We mention those sort of things.
Because arms limitation treaties include wheeled vehicles as tanks. So if you want to talk about a definition, that's a really good one.
And what happens when you fire your 120mm gun sideways from your...
and you flip over.
Your eight-wheeled vehicle, and you flip over. Okay. So anyway, other bits of legacy. There's also fun for other genres like bolo tanks. The great big, huge, gigantic space ones, Bolo. And Warhammer 40K.
Or Ogre, but
and Warhammer 40K with all their Bane Blades and Land Raiders and everything else. Look, and also something we've been missing for a while. Yes, Girls on Panzer does have a number of multi-turreted tanks in the anime and manga. The new Bao Fazarang, the 7TP, the T-28, T-35, and the OI all make an appearance. And with that, boys and girls, we're going to refer to the poll, John, if you want to bring that up.
So the poll is now at 52% for saying that multi-turret tanks were always a small boy's dream. No one's ever put enough on is now relegated to second place, but not by much at 48%. 21 votes, which, as we've said, is quite a lot for us. Okay, that's the poll. So... Okay, folks, we have a chat now with, we've had him on before, Jack Bauscher, who is a history teacher and has written 2 books now, and we're going to talk about his second book. And it's a very interesting story that I guarantee you almost no one's heard of. So, yeah, we will be back in the second half. We've got a lot to say about things happening in the world. Less stuff about tanks, but...
There'll be tanks involved.
Anyway, I look forward to...
I'll give you a slight hint. Firefly.
Yeah, Firefly is going to be in there. So, yeah. Anyway, keep the comments coming. We'll be upstairs responding to them.
Drinking beer.
So, let's go. Here we go. So we are joined again by Jack Bauscher, who's got a new book out, Thunder Run, Mictilla, 1945, the greatest combined arms manoeuvre battle of World War II. We're going to have to unpack that. Jack, welcome back to the show. It's really good to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys. It was so much fun last time. What I love about Totally Tanks is the fact that we can get into the nerdery of the stuff. That's what I love.
Oh, yeah. We're all for that. So your first book, Forgotten Armour, which my dad is a big fan of, and he's a very tough marker of World War II history. When we talked to you about that, it was your first book, and now you're doing all the big history festivals in the UK. I've just heard you've got another book coming out. You're working on it.
Yeah. So, since I've last been on, it has been a really, really sort of sudden start. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm like the new flavour of the month or anything, but just, going from first-time person to being on to third and fourth and thinking about fifth books about a year later, and, the new podcast and all this sort of thing. So, yeah, it's going really, really well. But I'm doing a big 1942, like it's going to be longer than the first two, but a big 1942 retreat from Burma book. And so the big thing for me is we all think of it as like a massive, like epic tragedy when I think it obviously is that, but a big part of my thing is going to be that the actual men in the circumstances, the fighting man, they actually fight incredibly bravely when they have really not been prepared for the war that finds them. And that's much bigger, higher level structural problems. And sort of a big thing, I'm interested in the human stories quite a lot, like for most of it. I've got a brilliant thing that I've just had of a guy that, completely forgotten, wins is recommended for a Victoria Cross, but gets nothing. No one's ever heard of him, but there are just some amazing stories in there that I'm looking forward to sort of bring to light, to sort of slightly change the narrative on it a little bit.
Yeah,
still balls up.
But let's talk about the book, the new book you've got out. Now, I'll come clean. I've never heard of Mictilla either. Now, the cover of your book is claiming it's the greatest combined arms manoeuvre battle of World War II. Can you, without giving away too much of the book, make that case for us?
So, I mean, it's slightly difficult to do without giving too much away from the book. But the basic point is that it is really the first time that what becomes sort of the NATO doctrine of combined arms manoeuvre is actually used in the way that they planned, like it was planned to be used by NATO through sort of the second half of the 20th century. So it's about brigade group mechanized columns striking out at the enemy, when and where they appear and hitting them with superior technology effectively. And it's more like the future of war than, say, something that's happening in Europe. The only other thing that I've sort of put, and this is on things like the back cover, this is the kind of operation if, like, you to use a very British football cliche, your Guderians, your Pattons, your Zhukovs, if they had done these battles, everyone would know about it. And nobody knows about it because of the Burma campaign, it doesn't fit the jungle, creepy crawly sort of monsoon jungle type narrative that it fits with. This is completely forgotten for the record, and it's a huge mechanized battle that, everybody should know about.
And I've in the Amazon reviews, you've had a crank going at you, thinking that you missed a regiment that was involved, but it was funny to see another commenter having a go at him. It's like, no, they weren't there.
They were that's that guy. He said, like, why haven't you included this group? They had Shermans as well. Yeah, there's training on Shermans in India well over
Yeah.
1,400 miles away. And
Yeah.
because of the weird route you have to take back to India, it's on the road, it's 2,500 miles away. As it happens, they're not relevant, mate.
Hmm.
But, you know,
India,
it
quite a
happens.
big place. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these guys this happens 80 miles behind Japanese lines. That's the other thing I should have said. This happens 80 miles behind Japanese lines. And even then, they're 700 miles from their logistical base, which is 1,500 miles from the training centre that unit was at. It's just some people.
Yeah, I mean, it's even as we always claim we're enthusiasts, not historians. It always pays to pull out the map and look where things actually are. It's this week as we record with the Western Iraq, possibly firing surface-to-air missiles at fuel tankers. It was a case of that's a long way from Iran. Just get the map out, have a look.
Yeah.
But to go back, so the main units in Mektila, as I understand it, are mostly Indian Army. Obviously, under the British Raj, but Indian Army
pre-partition India. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think the fact that obviously there were British officers involved, but in this battle, was it mostly an Indian affair against the Japanese, or
no? There was West African and East African units as well.
Yeah. So, I start the book with the East African units that are striking out from Imphal, but the main battle at the town of Mektila, the place that no one's ever heard of. That is that there aren't Indian troops there. There aren't African troops there, but they are the ones that are doing the main fight out of Imphal at the end of second half of 1944. But no, the main battle that the book's about, it's primarily Indian troops. So the two squadrons of Shermans are both regiments of Shermans that go. They are both Indian Army, and interestingly, in partition, Probyn's horse went to the Pakistani army and Deccan horse went to the Indian army, which is also interesting. It's one of those ones where you've got officers that 20 years later, junior officers 20 years later are senior commanders in like the Indo-Pakistani war or 30 years later, which is really interesting. But yeah, so there are two Indian regiments tank, and also then in the 17th Indian Division, you have a handful of British battalions, but 2/3 of all of the fighting men are Indian in the infantry, plus then two regiments of Indian tank crews as well. So yeah, it is very much an Indian affair.
And they were fighting against the Indian National Army on the other side as well.
Yes, so when they cross the Irrawaddy, there are a couple of detachments of INA. The interesting thing is they do have a slight stroke of luck. There's no evidence that it's deliberate, but the divide between two Japanese armies, the 28th Army in the south and the 15th Army in the middle, it happens to be the town they go for is the agreed boundary between those two armies. And so, any boundary between any two units is going to be a bit of a muddy affair of, big hands on little maps deciding who's in charge of what. And so they've stuffed in a couple of INA units to sort of make sure they've got some sort of crossover. And it makes that initial fight, whilst they do have some Japanese stiffeners, there are elements where they are able to push the crossing. The longest river crossing opposed river crossing in the Second World War as well. And they do manage to force it with a bit of firepower.
Yeah, with Slim's 14th Army, it was the largest Commonwealth Army under troops, just under 1 million troops under orders at that stage, and they're all volunteers. So
the Indian Army in total. Sorry, go on.
No.
Yeah, the Indian Army in total is 2.5 million men. And 1 million of them are directly facing sort of the Burma threat. And then you've got the other theatres, those that are in training and the administrative and logistical sides as well. Although once they're south of the Irrawaddy, they are outnumbered by the Japanese. So the Irrawaddy is the great river that sort of divides Burma in two. And they have to cross it to get to Mektila, which is another 80 miles, further south east of the Irrawaddy crossings as well, about 80 miles.
When you're talking about the two armies, attacking at the join, I'm reminded of my favourite Slim quote. Well, second favourite Slim quote, where he said, the British Army always fights uphill where four maps meet, and he was
And
he aiming
they're
at
all
that
different
join?
scales, and on all the maps
all
are different scales. Just remember that.
So, what was the question there, John?
Sorry, the question is, was he aiming at that join because he's so used to how painful it is to fight at these?
Did he have intelligence? Did he have intelligence to say that this is the place to? Because I mean, every army always wants to aim between the two organisations, because that is, as you say, is going to be where the less communication is, and less direct, less command and communication is going to be occurring.
Well,
so
it's
did he have
interesting.
intelligence to aim there?
Well, nothing that I've read on it, including his own words, seems to suggest that it was a deliberate move, and because it's very much. Because this is again longest river crossing in the Second World War, opposed river crossing, and yet they plan it in a few days. It is not because the big thing about this the crossing of the Irrawaddy at this point is they have assumed the Japanese will do what they've done in pretty much any other theatre, in that when they're being pushed back, they fight tooth and nail for every inch, and they don't. They withdraw across the central dry belt. So a big thing about this battle is the fact it takes place in some that's almost desert-like conditions. And because the Irrawaddy runs through the middle of this central dry belt, but the Japanese have always fought tooth and nail for every inch, Slim just makes the assumption the Japanese will fight on that central dry belt north and west of the Irrawaddy, close to his logistical bases and as he's advancing. And he wants to fight on the central dry belt because his tanks, artillery, air power will have huge advantages over the less mechanised and, to be honest, light infantry Japanese army. But they actually fall back behind the Irrawaddy, which completely takes them by surprise. So they're not quite prepared for a combat crossing. And so they haven't really had enough time to build up a combat intelligence picture of exactly where the boundaries are behind this new front line that is the Irrawaddy River. So no, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that it's a deliberate move. I mean, maybe it was, but there's nothing obvious in the records that I was looking for this.
Now, when we're talking about the combined arms aspects of it, now we've got Shermans. Did they still have Lees and Grants going around at that stage? And
yes, they do, but not in this battle. They're further north with a different tank brigade. These guys were kept in reserve at Imphal with their new Shermans ready for this invasion, and the Lee Grants were kept in action all up to this point. They barely had a rest.
Kohima and Imphal. And with the artillery, I know we had Sextons coming forward. Did they have towed artillery? I'm assuming they had towed artillery as well as moving forward.
Yeah, so they do have towed artillery, but interestingly, they don't actually use Sextons here. Because of the nature of where all their stuff is coming from America, all of the Sexton production is aimed towards the west coast of Canada to be shipped across. So because the Americans are already sending priests to the Pacific, it's decided that would just be far easier than shipping Sextons into different places. So they're using priests here, the 105 millimeters. They just think that the difficulty of ammunition is easier than the difficulty of shipping Sextons to the west coast. So did I say west coast?
My mistake.
Yeah,
I knew it was some.
You know what I mean?
Some sort of Sherman/Ram chassis that they've just chucked a gun into.
Yeah. There's one of the guys in the book. Is honestly, he's brilliant. His son, contacted me, basically with some film footage that he took about 20 years ago, and he was a forward observation officer driving around in a Sherman, but for the priests. And he was this fantastic bloke, because in these videos he would be like, I was charging around the desert, and it was the most wonderful time. I was shooting from the hip and all this stuff. And he did that thing that some old soldiers do, and he sort of drifts off into memory, and he just goes, yeah, it was great. It was great fun. It was great fun. This sort of thing. He was amazing.
I mean, life was better when we were young. That's always the...
Yeah, and he's talking about like a really grim battle 80 miles behind the lines, and it's great fun.
Yeah.
And look, when you're talking about the combined arms again, look, cannot overstate how much they relied upon the air support, air transport of supplies and landing in the reinforcements and so forth. I mean, that was a big aspect of of what they were trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose should we get into sort of the nuts and bolts of why I argue that it's the greatest combined arms battle?
Please do. Yeah.
So the battle itself actually starts. We sort of mentioned the Irrawaddy crossing there. The name Thunder Run starts after the crossing of the Irrawaddy because and the way. So what I've done with this, and what's brilliant is I'm very pleased with this is that this name is beginning to stick for this operation. I've seen it on things like the Imperial War Museum did a video recently where they called it that. But basically, they when I was studying for my master's dissertation that became the first book, Forgotten Armour, I did a chapter in that on Mektila, but it was at the same time we were studying the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and also it was February 2022, so it was when Putin tried to attack Kyiv in a southward direction from Belarus. In a similar sort of fashion, he sent sort of like a mechanized column down main roads. And sort of we were comparing, what did the Americans get right? What did the Russians get wrong? And also then what I then applied to this battle. And I was like, this story is too good. I need to do another book on it. So what happens is it leaves the Irrawaddy base at the Irrawaddy crossing point. And these two regiments of a tank brigade and then two brigades of a division, the third brigade is going to be flown in later. And they charge up this road, about 3,000 vehicles with air cover as well. They're being supplied by, like you said, Rob, they're being supplied completely by parachute drops until they capture an airfield, and then there'll be landing drops as well, or landing supplies as well. And they just charge through Japanese positions. They have a couple of tough fights. There's one at Oyin where they first experience genuine suicide bombing. So earlier in the war, the Japanese tended to have suicidal attacks, but they are trained to survive if they can. Ideally, they don't waste that training, but it's considered one of the more dangerous jobs, tank hunting. But these guys literally just dive underneath and blow themselves up. They literally run out and dive under the tracks and blow themselves up.
Where some of them have the explosives on a stick and they run up and slap it on the side. These ones decided that, they do away with the stick and just throw themselves at the tank.
Yeah, so one of the guys describes it. They charged through some infantry out of a bush, holding the explosive like a rugby ball. Ducking and weaving like someone breaking through the line. They charge through multiple different positions like this, and they get to Mektila itself. They surround it completely. The tanks skirt all the way around the outside, and because again it's all mechanized infantry, and they just crush it from multiple sides. And there's some really horrific street fighting. That's the other thing that we don't get. It's a quite sort of like semi-industrial town. It's been built because it's where all of the roads and the railway and an airfield all sort of meet in one place. So the Japanese have turned it into a massive supply hub. And the other thing we've not really mentioned is the fact that Mandalay, about 100 miles north, that's the obvious target. Everyone's heard of it. It's the old capital. There used to be a big British administrative base.
On the way to Mandalay.
Exactly, on the way to Mandalay. Everyone's heard of the Kipling poem in the mid-20th century. And so there are lots of deception operations and real operations to capture Mandalay, where all the Japanese reinforcements have sent up there. Capturing Mektila closes them in to the central dry belt so they don't withdraw again. Slim's nightmare is if the Japanese withdraw again into southern Burma, where it's jungle and paddy field again, they're out of the dry belt, all of his advantages in tanks, artillery, air power will be neutralized to a degree at least. And therefore make the fight before the coming monsoon really difficult. And if they don't get to Rangoon, they can't be supplied by the sea, and they might have to withdraw further back towards India just to survive the monsoon, because the roads and the air power won't be able to supply them that far into Burma. They'll have to pull back and then try again the following year. And obviously he doesn't want that. They don't know that the atomic bombs are coming. So, that's the other thing. There is a massive ticking clock to this battle. They have to complete it and get to Rangoon before the monsoon.
Finishing before the monsoon,
Yeah.
And I mean, in terms of the bigger war picture, the last thing they'd want is the Japanese withdrawing a large army back to Japan with what at the time they were still planning for an invasion.
Yeah, I mean, there's another 100,000 soldiers here. And remember, and the other reason why they're in Burma, is that there's another 1.5 million Japanese in China, and Burma really is about keeping China in the war at the end of the day. If you've got, all those men could have gone back to the home islands. Yeah. But yeah, so they capture McTilla, really grim street fighting, a couple of amazing Victoria Crosses as well. One guy, William Weston, literally is shot as he's approaching a Japanese bunker. He's 21 years old. He just pulls a grenade off his webbing and rolls inside and blows up from the inside, killing himself and those inside. Like, I see some of my students at 18 years old, and I think, they're only a couple of years younger, and it's just wild to me. And also another guy, Naik Fazal Din, he gets stabbed by a Japanese through the chest with a samurai sword. He pulls it out and still kills the Japanese guy and helps another friend who's also being attacked by a Japanese soldier as well. And he then crawls off, he then gets, well, he doesn't crawl off, he gets taken off and dies the following day or a few hours later in the dressing stations. But yeah, so a really grim street fight. And we don't think of that in the Burma campaign because it's like a semi-industrial European transport hub. Kind of, there's a railway station. You read descriptions, it sounds like Stalingrad because it's like they're talking about the dust and the brickwork. They're fighting through, a factory, a warehouse, a railway station, all this sort of stuff. It's those sorts of descriptions. But the thing is, because they're. Oh, sorry, go on, Rob. Go on.
I was going to say, and Slim was, as you said before, Slim was very worried about it was going to turn into a months-long campaign to dig them out of every building, out of every hovel. But instead of 4 days later. They'd cut everything off and repulsed any of the reinforcements coming in, and they managed to take the town and secure the central Burma.
Yeah. So the problem they have though is that they know that the Japanese are going to come back at them. They will send reinforcements because, again, the beauty of attacking Mekhtila is the fact that because it's all that supply hub, the Japanese will need it. So they have to send reinforcements, which will then make the fight at Mandalay easier. But this is where the big combined arms thing really actually comes in, because the Thunder Run is one part, but then as those reinforcements arrive, David Punch Cowan, who's been in charge of the 17th Indian Division since the Sitang Bridge disaster in February 1942, so he's 3 years in now, as being commander of this division. He sets up brigade boxes around the town because he doesn't have enough men to make like a continuous line, but also a continuous line of, say, trenches wouldn't suit the troops that he has with him, the tanks and so on. And so the idea is, we mentioned self-propelled guns as well, like a battalion of infantry, a couple of squadrons or a squadron of tanks from one of the regiments, and then a troop of the self-propelled guns, plus an RAF control post in a jeep, visual control post they're called. They then ride out, and sort of 6 of them a day are just sweeping arcs around the compass in every direction and destroying any Japanese build-ups that arrive. And the Japanese help them out with this because their doctrine, not unlike, say, the Germans in the Second World War and the First World War, the moment the enemy captures something, you counterattack it quickly before they settle. But the trouble is that means that these sweeps can destroy the Japanese piecemeal as and when they arrive. And that's really where the combined arms thing comes in, because what you have is these soldiers riding on the backs of tanks, riding into battle, dismounting 1,000 yards from the Japanese position that's been identified. And we should say that the locals are reporting in because they can see what way the wind is blowing, and they're coming in and reporting to the British as well. There's aerial reconnaissance.
What was it called? The Anti-Fascist Freedom Associate League, or
the Anti-Fascist League,
or something?
the Anti-Fascist League. Yeah,
such a great name.
And there's loads of this sort of. Yeah, and they're all coming in. They're all coming in and telling them what's going on. It's interesting because the guy that's doing this actually ends up in the Ted Heath government. He's like a British ambassador to the UN in the 70s, things like that. But he's a young intelligence officer on the staff of the 17th Indian Division here. But yeah, and that's really the thing, is that they're going out and there are a couple of small tank skirmishes, but it's mostly against Japanese infantry and artillery, because the Japanese deliberately send basically all of 15th Army's artillery, including like 150 millimeter howitzers, 105 millimeter sort of siege gun stuff, as well as the normal establishment that would be in the divisions that attack. Because these because the 17th Indian Division plus which is 3 brigades of infantry plus another brigade gets flown in at the beginning of March or midway through March, and then the 2 tank regiments as well. They are attacked by 2 Japanese divisions, but one of them is green, never seen battle, and also is slightly undermanned, and the other one is very, very good, the 18th Division. They come south, having fought the the Chinese, Americans, and a British division up in the far north of Burma. they're like the Japanese commander Kimura. He says they're his best division, and so they're attacked from these two sides. But these armored sweeps just overwhelm them, even though they're outnumbered and they're 80 miles behind the front lines. And it's literally they drive up to an objective, the infantry dismount, the self-propelled guns lay on a chute, the tanks and infantry advance in, and then they just sweep through the objective. And this is how. And the thing that's important is this is how NATO intended to defend Europe with brigade groups to Japanese advances. Is you send a much more high-tech brigade group to attack a Russian incursion into, say, the North German plain, all that sort of thing.
It's a slightly false equivalency there, because I think the Russians would have had a lot more anti-tank capabilities than the Japanese had.
That's very true. That's very true. But no, but the doctrine is what I'm talking about there. The idea of you send a brigade group. So I'm not saying it would, like, you literally copy and paste it and it's just as easy. No. But you overwhelm them with greater technological ability, is what I'm saying, in a brigade group that is sent to an incursion because the enemy have mass, but you use your technology in this particular way. So I'm not saying it'll be the same. I'm just saying it's the doctrine.
Yeah, and as I think the big thing is the command and control and communications between your organisations to be able to make them all work together, so that you can ensure that your tanks are going in the same place, your artillery is going, as your infantry is going, as your air support's going, and where you go. Whereas that probably all those four things have probably been separate in a lot of other places.
And that's things that they're really beginning to bring those things together in a way that hasn't necessarily happened. I mean, it is happening in Europe as well, but the thing here is the overwhelming nature of this victory is complete. The Japanese are crushed by this particular battle.
And it's easy to forget, if you only look at the second half of World War II, just how good the Japanese were in the first half of the war. And, they really cleaned the clocks out of Western units that had significant positive records up until they came up against the Japanese. The Japanese weren't soft pushovers in any way. And it's a real tribute to the way that lessons were learned and, things were accomplished late in the war that were unthinkable not that long before.
Yeah, there's a really professional culture in the Indian Army that survives the massive expansion. There's a machine gun officer that fights in Mandalay called John Prendergast, and a really interesting quote that I liked of his was he talked about how, like, amongst all his brother officers and British units, once the unit had clocked off on training, they had clocked off. They went and played football. They went into, if they had leave, they went into towns and things like that. Whereas in the Indian units, when he moved over to the Indian Army, he noticed how, clocking off time at the end of a day's training, and then he'd see his Indian soldiers would be, spending the rest of the evening with the machine gun manual for the piece of kit, and they're there reading it and then trying to memorize it, closing their eyes and saying it back to themselves. Now these are like 18-year-old guys that were coming from rural backgrounds in northwestern India or something, or northern India or something, and they're treating it like it almost like they're studying for a degree kind of thing. Whereas a British soldier would go off and play football or go and get drunk. His guys are spending the evening memorizing the training manuals, and that's always that thing that typifies for me. There is that thing about British soldiers, how you don't talk shop after we've done for the day, and all this sort of stuff. You don't talk about the training. You're in the mess to then enjoy yourself. That the Indian Army is completely different to that. There is much more of a culture of lesson learning. And also there's a freedom in the Indian Army. In the British Army, they don't want divisional commanders saying, this is what we've just tried and this is what worked, and putting out a pamphlet and sending it to other units. In the British Army, they're like, no, we want control at the top of this sort of information. Whereas in the Indian Army, it's very much, no, yeah, you did a thing, share it. Okay, let us know what you did and what you tried. And that just means, like, so a really good example of that is after the Battle of the Admin Box. There is, within a couple of weeks, information being sent to the units that then fight at Imphal and Kohima, including 17th Indian Division, who are at Imphal. They get information from the 5th and 7th Indian Divisions at the Admin Box and 2nd Arakan campaign. And they learn how to make those brigade box work. They learn how to make tank fighting work, because they've taken the training of 1943, but then they've tested it in battle and they've shared it on. And that happens less in the British Army, whereas that happens a lot in the Indian Army, to a much greater degree.
Okay, that is an interesting observation. Thanks for that, Jack.
Yeah. So the way to think about it is the Indian Army allows people to share things sideways, whereas the British Army wants everything fed upwards and then going back down through the chain of command. Whereas the Indian Army, it's like, send it sideways. We're quite happy with that. If it works, send it.
Nice one. Is there anything else you want to mention about the book before we close up?
I mean,
why should someone buy this book?
Yeah. The main thing is that, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I'm very, very interested in the story of the people. So, the thing that happens with this particular 1945 battle is it's often just treated at a very high level of, it's, the real important battle is in Fal and Kohima, which, don't get me wrong, they are very, very important.
Yes.
But the Japanese taking a lot of reinforcements.
Protecting
the Japanese
the southern flank of China and northern India and so forth.
And what happens there is that they lose 50,000 men, but they do bring in another 30,000 reinforcements, and that's always forgotten from the story. And once the Allies get into Burma, their assets will begin to have to be withdrawn the deeper you get into Burma because of the reliance on air power. So they keep having to withdraw divisions. So as they get further from their own supply base, they have to weaken their own hand just to make sure that what is there has the ability to fight. And so this battle or this campaign in 1945 is so often seen as like the mopping up. Imphal Kohima was the big thing. There was an awful lot of fighting left in 1945.
Yeah.
And this is the great masterstroke.
Was not on the back foot yet.
Yeah, it's not on the back foot yet. It's being pushed back. It's having setbacks, serious setbacks, but they still need to be broken. And in particular in Burma, the battle at Mektila is the one that breaks them. Because, the fighting at Mandalay is important, but remember that the fighting at Mandalay is drawn off to support Mektila, where rather than, say, the Japanese just leaving Mektila be and fighting Mandalay, they have to draw reinforcements off. So this battle was really, really important to breaking the Japanese and getting to Rangoon, because the thing is they fight for five and a bit weeks at Mektila, but they then, end that one town. But the 400 miles to Rangoon is another 5-6 weeks. And so they've broken the Japanese there, and then they've not had to fight them in the jungles to the south, which they get through very, very quickly. It's also really the last big pitched battle, like properly pitched battle, big operational plans, rather than, say, battles that are scratched together at a moment's notice, like Pure Boy, which is in April. That's a big battle, but really the Japanese are in disarray. They're really just in a couple of small, disorganized groups. It's a vicious fight, but it's not really a big pitched battle. It's just they come across them, they send some guys around behind them and then crush it. This is the last big pitched battle. And what I'd love to do always is try to get as many of the eyewitness accounts there. So, I do the big strategy, but it's normally the way of getting down to then telling you what the fighting is like on the ground as well. And, a lot of people have described it, to me very kindly on social media and stuff. It's a page turner. They enjoy the narrative of it and getting through it and the sort of the excitement of it. Because again, we just don't think of these amazing modern maneuver battles taking place in Burma. So it's one of those stories that should be out there. I joke that, I joke that it's the greatest combined arms battle of maneuver, of World War II. We all know what we're doing here. But I would at least try and stand it up as best as I can, but I would at least ask people to read it and make their own minds up on it, because honestly, it blows people away. I think, because you just don't think this is what happens in Burma. You just don't.
Nice one. And Jack, if people want to hear more from you, what's the best way for them to follow your stuff?
Yeah, of course. So I'm at History Bausch on all of my socials, or just my name on Facebook, if that's what you're on. And also, of course, I do a podcast with Robert Lyman on the Burma campaign called the Forgotten War Podcast. So Robert Lyman, obviously of your parish, he's often is forgotten, but he is an Australian. He's born in Australia when he moved to here. He moved to Britain when he joined the army. When he was on, I can't remember what it was. There was some program in the late 70s, early 80s, whenever it was, where he was he was enlisted in the British Army in Australia. They were out in Australia recruiting, and that's how he ended up in Britain. But he is an Australian, even though he doesn't sound it.
Oh, well. Nice one. Okay, well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about your book. Thank you for writing the book as well. We hopefully will talk to you when the next book is out. Thank you for that.
Yeah, 2027. But yeah, thank you, gents.
Okay, folks, so I hope you enjoyed that chat with Jack Boucher, and I hope as many of you as possible go out and buy his book because it's a fascinating read, and he's an author worth watching.
And he wants to say an easy read as well.
Yeah, no, he's good. He's just good at what he does. All right, so we need to thank the patrons now, Rob.
Wonderful, wonderful people they are. Sexy, good-looking, and smell very nice.
Yeah. Now Hans Vormhat has given us another $30 as well. So thank you, Hans, for that. But in terms of the patrons, the Artissifer tier, who get the interview early and the ad-free video and audio of the show, we have Brian Jenkins, Pear, Cornelius Weber, Chris Peze, Anton Gorbanov, Maximus, Chicago John, Hans Vormhat, Johnny Oot, Monty, Jacob Caban. And then the Apprentice tier, who also get the ad-free audio and video of the show, we have David Mulvaney, Scotch12, Floaty Burb, Steve Matthews, Jamie Stokes, Guy Hook, Jay Beckman Strauss, Hans Wang, Henry Hemmer, Dan Sapienza, Christoph Keller, Tony L, Elliot Spicer, Russell Phillips, Red Rum X, Callum, Steve Broomfield, James Van Dyke, The Rain Man, Joe M, and Mark Dorner. So on that note, Rob, we will...
hope you're going well, Mark, in driving around the Kentucky, did we say? Yeah.
Switch the slideshow to the second half. There we go. There's something for you, Alan, on the screen now. But yes, patrons and Apple Bastardry, so just noting that if you do want to join us on Patreon, do it through a web browser, not through an Apple app, because they'll keep 30% of our money. Or your money.
And they've got enough money.
Yeah, they've got a lot more money.
They won't even spend it on
us,
beer.
But,
so we'll make sure we spend it on beer, all right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, but yeah, totallytank.net is the place to...
now, we'll get into the beer reviews soon, but right now we need to finish off some of the Commander's Reserve.
Yeah, the Vomit Bombs, the Victor Bravos, the Vitamin Bs, the Victoria Bitters, so Monty has joined us saying, glad to be here for the first time. Bit upset I'm not able to drink along at the moment, though. We are upset that you can't do that as well. But,
I'm assuming driving a school bus or something.
Well, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And from our point of view, a reminder that you can join us in our Super Rugby tipping competition on Super Brew. Just look for Totally Tank. And having been dead last in week 1 and 10 points off the pace, I've somehow picked up the next lot of winners, and I'm now in first place as of writing after 3 games, which is like 2 weeks ago. So we won't mention what happens in the next 2 weeks unless I'm still in front. I think I'm doing pretty well.
You're doing much better than me at the moment. Yeah, but it's been a very topsy-turvy competition.
I think I'm still doing well. So yeah, I went from dead last to first, then back in fourth. Anyway, just remember.
Anyway, rugby, it's like war without anyone having to die.
Yeah. And very rare circumstances. All right, just remember, if you are after an upset win, always pick the Fijian Drua when they are playing in Lautoka. Because, they win there a lot.
Yeah, I tipped against them last week. Yeah.
Anyway, friend of the show, Dr. Al Palazzo, sent us a little read about AUKUS and how it's not about the subs Australia will never get, but it's actually about the naval base in Western Australia that the US will get to service their own subs. So remember, I wrote this probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. A couple of
More
points.
Important now.
Before the war started, anyway. A couple of points that... really hit home from the article from that and some of his other books. The Australian government is racing to build 1,200 homes for the US sailors who will be based in Perth when they don't actually want to build homes for any Australians. They promised to, but it's yet to happen. So there's a lot of promises of, we're going to build 1 million homes for Australians. Well, a lot of that hasn't happened. The second one is that China could nuke the base and Australia if there was a conflict. And whilst many people believe the US would look after us, they don't actually have a treaty with Australia where that would retaliate, that the US would retaliate with nukes. So no harm, no foul for the US. Just ask Iran.
Or ask the UAE how their umbrella's going. But yeah.
Yeah. 3, the Australian government has a don't ask, don't tell policy about US nukes coming through Australia. We do have a law that says ships and planes with nuclear weapons are not allowed in Australia, but we don't actually ask what the B-52s landing at Tyndall or the subs going through Garden Island and WA are carrying, and the US doesn't tell us. So it's all good.
Yeah, it's perfect.
All right, the Epstein War.
But before we get... Oh, hang on. We got a little bit to go with the beers, so
Gentlemen, bottoms up.
Bottoms up. We'll work on these, and I will have a little rant about the Epstein War. So, first of all, we just want to say that a monthly podcast about tanks is going to struggle talking about an air-sea war, but there are some things we want to get off our chests. Firstly, let's remember that the US and Israel started this war to distract from the crimes of their heads of government.
Bibi's going to go to jail as soon as he's not Prime Minister.
So he has to keep the war going, and Trump wanted to keep the Epstein files out of the press. That's the only reason this is happening. There was no imminent threat to justify a war of preemption, and the US Secretary of State tried to frame the US involvement as preempting Iranian retaliation for Israeli attacks, which is, even from a beer-soaked basement in Australia, very obviously bullcrap. When we talk about dead schoolgirls, and I have seen the pictures of those tiny shrouded bodies, and I will never get over how angry I am about that. But we also talk about empty diesel Bowsers worldwide. Let's not lose sight of there being no coherent justification for this stupid war from the US leadership. They can come up with a reason after reason after reason, but none of them are coherent. They don't match. It's just whatever they say in the moment to justify it. But let's get into how stupid this war is and how lack of planning that's gone into it. I'm going to read now, because it doesn't take very long, the mission statement of the United States Navy. In full, the United States is a maritime nation and the US Navy protects America at sea. Alongside our allies and partners, we defend freedom, preserve economic prosperity, and keep the seas open and free. Our nation is engaged in long-term competition. To defend American interests around the globe, the US Navy must remain prepared to execute our timeless role as directed by the Congress and the President. And I do not know what part of that statement is fulfilled by a Navy that has decommissioned its minesweepers and refuses to escort convoys through the Strait of Hormuz. No one appears to have contemplated the Iranians suppressing American radar networks, which is a very strange blind spot for the United States, a nation that is the undisputed master of the suppression of enemy air defenses. A simple sea whiz, like a phalanx, would probably have sufficed to keep Shaheds out of the THAAD radars. And then let's talk about the Shahed cruise missiles, the ones Pete Hegseth said he'd been surprised by and had no plan to defend against. Yes?
I'm going to open a beer.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. This is a weapon that Iran has been supplying to Russia for 4 whole years and has been bombarding Ukraine the whole time. This is a weapon that the US has produced its own version of, the FLM 1-6 Lucas. You have been so surprised by that, you have to beg the Ukrainians for help defending against them. And this reminds me of the Blackadder line. And
for those who haven't seen it, Blackadder's a show. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Watch it.
Season 1 is a bit weird, and then in seasons 2 through 4, it really hits the stride. But
this is season 4.
So the line is Bob, and Bob is a woman in a man's uniform in ways that fuse the brains of a whole generation. But Bob says, "I want to see how a war is fought so badly," and Blackadder replies, "Well, Bob, you've come to the right place. A war hasn't been fought this badly since Olaf the Hairy, High Chief of all the Vikings, accidentally ordered 80,000 battle helmets with the horns on the inside." And I don't often think we could do better than the professionals, but I was on January 1, 2026, aware that the Strait of Hormuz was a critical waterway. and that Iran manufactured huge quantities of long-range weapons, and that the Persian Gulf has a lot of very fragile infrastructure like desalination plants and oil refineries, which the rest of the world relies on because certain complete idiots like the US president have refused to decarbonize the global economy. And, I was at Dalgety, Rob,
which is
a week ago.
100 miles south of where we are.
And so I was buying a coffee at the coffee stand, and that people were getting very angry about folks in the big cities, and because we were buying the diesel that they wanted, and because no one has access to diesel now. And, I refrained from saying, well, I've got an electric bicycle and I live in a house with solar panels and
a hybrid.
Yeah, well, yeah, we do have a hybrid as well. But I refrained from saying that.
So I've got my electric bicycle now and an electric car. So
I thought they would kill me if I'd told them. But
when I was at the coast last weekend and saw all the petrol barrels with out of order around them, I was saying, I've got my electric car. But then my power kept on tripping, and I was really annoyed.
Now, Rob, on the bright side of this, this insane, horrific,
very small bright side. Right?
So the kill ratios of F-18s over F-15s has seen the needle move decisively in the Hornets' favour because one rogue Kuwaiti pilot in an F-18 blatted 3 F-15s out of the sky, and
the pilot survived.
The pilots all survived, but I did see numerous former aviators saying it is possible to accidentally shoot down 1. It is conceivable to accidentally shoot down 2. It is enemy action to have shot down 3.
2 more, it is nice.
Yeah. Well, with the tankers going down, the ghost of Kuwait, maybe he's an ace already. But if you get 2 more Eagles to be an Eagle ace, that would be truly amazing.
Yes.
But, with the whole thing about Americans saying that, the F-15 has never been defeated in air combat, well, the F-18's shot down 3 of them now. So go Bugs. Go Bugs.
All right, let's get on to some beer, John. Finish that up. Now, today we've got the, how do you want to say that one? Zvitek?
So I know this well because the Polish club in Canberra is one of the best live music venues in this godforsaken town. And they sell...
and also where our local political party meets for our beer hill pushes.
Yeah. But anyway, the point is that Zviets is normally quite cheap, and it's 5-6%.
5%, 500 ml.
5% Polish lager in a tall boy that you can often get for like $10.
Which is exactly what it cost me from the shops. And this is in honour of the 7TP because, well, what are you going to get for a tank that has multi-turrets? I thought, well, I could get a very heady beer, something like that. But I thought, no, I'll just keep it simple and stick with the Zvitek.
Zviets. Zviets is how we pronounce it.
I'm confusing my Polish beers at the same time.
Anyway, it's a lovely beer, and I'm a huge fan of it. I've drank an enormous amount of it, and thank you, Rob, for bringing us some for this episode.
Cheers. I established in 1856, 2 standard drinks in the tall boy. And lots of little writing that my poor old eyes can't see. It's going to go down. It's going to go down nicely.
It tastes the hop profile is heading into stuff like Pilgrim, things that British traditional beers. So it's almost like a British ale hop profile in a light and fluffy lager. But the bigger point is that it's a great big can and it costs almost nothing and.
For Australia.
It tastes pretty good, and
just remember, boys and girls, beer is quite expensive here in Australia. It doesn't stop us drinking it.
Yeah, well,
because we tax our beer more than we tax the gas that we give away to overseas companies.
Australian beer drinkers pay more than the Australian gas industry, which
is a big point here in Australia at the moment.
Up until last week, we were the 2nd biggest exporter of gas in the world. But as of the Iranian airstrikes on the Qatari gas fields, Australia is now the #1 exporter of
and gas. Our gas cartel are looking at the money and saying, we're going to take all of that, and Australia's going to get nothing because it all goes to overseas companies. And because we pay, as we said, we pay more in beer tax than we get from our gas that we have here in Australia and ship overseas, because our politicians are a bunch of useless. Anyway,
well, they're just owned by the gas industry.
The big politicians aren't. Anyway, now. So, what do we think of the beer, John? Very nice. Very nice.
Well, I've just said it's a regular go-to beer that when I go to live music venues, if you're in Canberra, the Polish Club and Smith's Alternative are two of the best live music venues, and Descent, which we talked about last episode, is also great. And I don't know what their Polish beer position is, but. All right, Rob, what have we got to talk about now?
All right, so the question is, how many wars will Trump have to start before he gets the Nobel Peace Prize?
I thought he'd given up on that. He was
No. The Japanese Prime Minister, she just said, I'm definitely going to be nominating you for the Nobel Peace Prize the other day. After he made a joke about Surprise and Pearl Harbor to her.
I'm glad she could wrap her lips around that, but
all right, just realise that she's very right wing. I mean, she's like the baloney. She's
But I did love that moment where he literally said, "Oh, well, you didn't warn us about Pearl Harbor," and it's like, but everyone in Japan's like, for 80 years you've been giving us crap about the day that will live in infamy.
And what did you do? You dropped 2 atomic bombs on us.
Yeah, and you dropped atomic bombs on us for it, and then it's like, oh no, suddenly we should have, no, it's business as usual to just attack people with no warning or no declaration of war.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. The other one is, how many foreign leaders does it take? Does Trump need to take out until he's king of the oil, or how many millions of will die to try and distract from the Epstein files? Which is pretty much where we're at. Now, John, here's your joke, which I really enjoyed.
Okay, so Rob, what is the difference between Iran and Vietnam?
I don't know, John. What is the difference between Iran and Vietnam?
So Trump had a plan for getting out of Vietnam.
Boom,
tish. Yeah.
All right. Now, I was also wondering how Australia's strategic oil reserves being held by the US are doing. It would be a real shame if Australia started running out of oil. And when we asked King Don for access to our stockpile, he said, of course you can have your oil. Just take Damascus for us first. Because as we keep saying, Australians keep taking Damascus in world wars. And the third one will be there.
So
one of the oldest cities in the world.
Yeah, on this point, though, it is worth noting that...
I made a mistake.
For all our many criticisms of the Albanese Labor government, and they are not perfect by any way, when they came to power in 2022, they looked at the oil reserve situation that the previous government had entered us into and said, you know what, there's not much point having our oil reserves in US...
So is that when we had 90 days of oil reserve, 30 in Australia, 60 overseas, and they just said, oh, look, we'll just sell off these 60 overseas and only have 30 days worth of oil in Australia?
Yeah, look, that's a whole other thing. But the point was, the previous government, it was an awful government. It was terrible. The Morrison government, for anyone keeping score, had paid the US to store Australian strategic oil reserves in US strategic oil reserve holdings. And it was like, how is this oil ever getting from the US to Australia in an emergency situation? It's never coming. So we sold that oil back to the Americans, and now we have 30 days of reserves in Australia. It's more that there are supply disruptions when a crisis happens. So to be fair, the government is being awful. It's accusing farmers of doing something terrible. It's like, oh, hoarding fuel is un-Australian. And it's like, no, if you have a 5,000 litre diesel tank on your property because you're a farmer and you need to fuel up combine harvesters and tractors, then if you look at something that's going to spike the price, you say, oh, I will order 5,000 litres to fill my tank right now. That is just being sensible. That's not being un-Australian or
paying the inflated prices that are going to happen in the next.
Yeah, you're just trying to. You can see an obvious point to game the market, and not be stuffed.
I hear other countries, John, have had transitioned their say transport fleets to LPG.
Well, Canada did. Yeah.
Really? And who is the major producer of LPG in the world?
We are.
Australia is.
As of last week, we've overtaken Qatar because their fields got bombed and ours haven't.
And wouldn't it have been smart if we transitioned our transport network with this huge country like Canada, a huge country like Canada, if we transitioned our transport infrastructure from...
To run the fuel we can make in this country? Yeah.
You think so, but did that happen? No.
But as we said, and particularly go back and watch our interview with Al Palazzo on The Big Fix, Australia's national security. The biggest thing we could do as a country would be to electrify our transport networks so that we didn't need imported fuel at all.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought?
Because one thing we've got over Canada is a lot of sun.
So much sun.
So much sun.
There is not a single Australian farmer who's ever said, I've had too much sun this year. It's never happened.
All right, something a little less...
Back to tanks. All right.
Something a little less exciting, unless you're a logistician. Right, the 3 Baltic states have signed up to a military mobility Schengen area, which enables them to move defence equipment across borders without having to jump through admin hoops. So if any of the little green men start crossing the border, they can support one another without having to stop and check if they have the correct coloured road flags on their vehicle. So this is very important for Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. Right, basically means that... if the little green men, who are the Russian troops without insignia, start crossing the border, one, they've all said, we're just going to shoot those guys on sight. We're not going to wait about finding out who they belong to. We're just going to shoot them so that Russia knows that that's what's going to happen. And the other one is that they can start moving troops and tanks around. And again, these are heavily armed areas with a lot of NATO troops from Canada, the US, UK. They're all in these 3 countries, right? So they've got Leopard 2s, they've got Challenger 2s, they've got Abrams, all in these countries already. And so if they need to get them from one side to the other, they can without having to stop. And as I say, okay, you only got a red transport flag on this convoy. You need to have a red and yellow flag. No, it just goes. So, but they don't have the Schengen area means... for Europe, that means people are able to move from one area within Europe to another without having to stop and do any sort of administration because their passports say, yep, you're part of the Schengen area. So for those 3 Baltic states, they have a Schengen area for military movements in case anything happens untowards with the Russians. Anyway, John.
So one of the interesting things coming out of Ukraine at the moment is the Ukrainian dev droids.
Beep, boop, boop, boop. Beep, boop, beep, boop.
Yeah, which are basically...
Daka, daka.
Little tiny... The tracks look like a World War II era Goliath, but they've got a big gun on them. And the important thing with the dev droids is they can be resupplied by other drones. So they drop batteries, they drop ammunition, and the droids can keep fighting. So in Ukraine, they've been holding ground without weakling meat bags getting in the way.
Who needs sleep and food and water and shelter and everything else?
Yeah, or just don't get happy when it gets too cold. So these are fully automated with the battery and ammunition resupply being conducted by other drones. It's a really interesting step forward.
Murderbot.
Yeah, well,
it's good series from the books are also good, so enjoy them. Right, anyway,
so we should probably also mention that the Ukraine war is becoming much more fluid at the moment. This is interesting, but we don't know how it's going to turn out. Both sides are engaging in advances in the last week, which... they're advancing in different places against each other. It's almost turning into a fluid war of maneuver, which is much more interesting than trench warfare.
Yeah, as soon as they find anywhere that's the minefields aren't so deep that they can get through. So
anyway, control maps are getting weird because we got very sparse populations of actual human troops, and they're moving through drone-haunted landscapes, and it's interesting and weird. All right, Rob, this is you.
Okay, near to last, because I love that feeling of hope in dark times. Nathan Fillion has kicked off his campaign to bring back Firefly as an animated series, which, along with Red Dwarf, is one of my favourites. So, fingers crossed for more of both.
Look, I'll admit to being a little sad that they're not going to attempt a live-action Firefly. Putting the band back together with an increasingly haggard crew, but, I get that this way, Jewel State and Marina Baccarin can forever live in our minds as they were in that
They
one.
are still such beautiful women, especially.
I get that they're both still so beautiful, and it's horrible the way. Like, I mean, I've definitely seen Jewel State has all these people like, oh, why are you so ugly now? And just like, it's been 20 years, dude. It's,
25,
yeah, 25 years. And she's still a very beautiful woman, and it's just like, why does she have to put up with these idiots? But
anyway. Mm-hmm. All I can hope for is I actually started rewatching the series the other day, even before this announcement came out, and just really looking forward to seeing whatever comes out of it.
There is an element of Confederate coding that I don't love about Firefly.
Well, the point is being on the losing side of a righteous war, and which is not Confederate coding. It might have come from there, but there was inspired by that idea. But anyway, and lastly,
so Alan's asking, they're talking about animated versus it's not live action what they're planning, but
as especially with Alan Tudyk as being the master of the voice actors these days, doing so many characters. I mean, he's the Disney go-to man.
Well, KSO 5 will be his greatest role ever, but anyway,
dude, he's done so many more. I
know he's done more, but
hey, the chicken on Moana. I mean, who could have done that except him? All right, they made a character with nothing else that just goes. Anyway, lastly, some more good news to share. We're going to Armour Fest in Cairns.
Ozarmer Fest. The one in Cairns.
This year, so get your tickets, come join us, ride tanks, drink beer, and hang around talking tanks with like-minded individuals.
Now, just for our international audience, Cairns is the international visiting hotspot for Australia. You've got the Great Barrier Reef. There's helicopters taking you out there all the time. None of this is cheap. This is not a cheap excursion, but everyone who can make it, we will have a great time in the pubs every night while this thing's going on.
And as I was saying, there will be money over the bar. You will be drinking beers on us if you come along and say, hey, guys, I listened to you. Let's go to the pub. And we'll say, we're going to this pub tonight. Come and join us. All right?
Yeah. And there are... We can't announce it because it's not our role, but there's a lot of interesting people coming this year. So it's
as long as the world doesn't stop flying in the next 6 months,
there might well be a panel discussion that we may or may not be involved in. But anyway, it's going to be awesome. So we strongly recommend you come. And on that note, Rob, we are at we're over 2 hours. We are done. Let's let everyone go. Thank you so much for watching and listening and being part of the show. And we will see you soon.
Anzac Day next month.